Over the past few weeks, my Republican colleagues and I spent quite a bit of time making sure the American people know just how little of President Biden's $2+ trillion infrastructure plan will fund actual infrastructure plans to fix roads, bridges that are so in need of repair. These are things that the Tennesseans have repeatedly told me they want to see in a bill. Fix the roads, fix the bridges. What do they want to be taken out of that bill? They want to get rid of some of these provisions that have nothing to do with infrastructure. Nothing. So imagine their disappointment. People that are ready for a highway bill, that are ready for a transportation bill, that are ready for an infrastructure bill. Imagine their disappointment when they discovered that all the funding that they had hoped was going to go to potholes and expanding lanes on the interstate and fixing flooded back roads would instead be spent on electric cars, union advocates, and climate change ambassadors. Madam President, I know pothole repair isn't flashy, but it's what Tennesseans need. An electric car does not do you one bit of good when you're going to have a 4x4 to go pull it out of the mud every single time it rains. We're pretty practical people. And my wish would be that my colleagues across the aisle would join us in reviewing the needs of the American people, and in being practical. The lack of practicality has been a recurring problem in the months since President Biden took office. It seems that the Democrats here in Washington, D.C. can't resist the urge to throw money at social media-friendly causes that not even the most talented communicators have been able to tie to the pressing needs of the American people. They did it with COVID relief, and now they're doing it with this infrastructure boondoggle. The wish list just doesn't match the PR campaign. And that's a shame, because this country has its own wish list of urgently needed items that we really can no longer afford to ignore. Just a few weeks ago, I took my own trip down to the southern border to get a sense of the situation on the ground. And Madam President, it is a dire situation. We are facing an environmental crisis, a national security crisis, and a humanitarian crisis that is massive in scope. If we want to talk about infrastructure projects that matter, let's talk about all the infrastructure that President Biden abandoned back in January when he halted construction on the wall. To paraphrase a famous saying, a 450-mile long stretch of border wall serves the purpose right up until you hit mile 451. And here you can see that's the situation that ranchers and law enforcement officials in southern Arizona are dealing with. The construction just stopped. President Biden's proclamation ordered contractors to stop work and abandon their progress. Immediate stop. So they walked away because they had to. What did they leave? They left behind an unfinished wall, piles of supplies, and roads and other infrastructure built to support construction crews. Everything is sitting there at the border. The equipment, the border wall, it is all there, wasting away. Tax dollars right there. All of that is now vulnerable to exploitation by the cartels and the traffickers because it's sitting there on the border. This is an absolute shame, an absolute shame. And what we know is that the cartels and the traffickers, whether they're drug traffickers or sex traffickers or whether they're moving gangs, they're taking full advantage of this situation. I got the chance to see where the coyotes and the drug smugglers are coming across now that there's no activity on the border to deter them from using access points built into the wall for their own purposes. In Cochise County alone, officials have seen a 200% increase in migrants this year. 200%. The holes in the wall have turned into walking paths for the Sinaloa cartel drug runners. Law enforcement officials have set up an extensive network of cameras, but there's only so many leads that they can chase when the Border Patrol agents who should be supporting these efforts are busy implementing useless and detrimental catch and release programs. And see, Madam President, you see where there's a gap in the wall. Why do you have these gaps? Because the doors that were to go into these gaps are sitting, not in place. Why do you have these gaps? You have them because the wall components are there in the dirt. But what did President Biden say? As of today, no more. No more. Stop. Immediately. Halt. Do not build this wall. And what is it that our Border Patrol tell us that they need? They need a wall, they need more technology, and they need more agents and officers on the ground. This has been their request for years. For years. On private property along the border, you can see where migrants have ditched their old clothes in exchange for actual uniforms that identify them to a cartel because they are given them by the cartel. It is their cartel-issued clothing, much like a work uniform. There are piles of discarded backpacks, water bottles, and medicine at regular intervals. There's no telling if the people who abandoned these items made it out alive, because we know many do not make it out alive. Many of them are left to die in the desert by their handlers, the coyotes and the cartels. Madam President, it is vital to note, you do not cross that border unless you are working with the cartel, which means you have paid the cartel a fee to come across that border, or you've agreed to go into modern-day slavery and work out your fee, whether it's with the labor gang, an MS-13 gang, sex trafficking gang. You got to work that fee out once you come across. Now, the ranchers who own these long stretches of property have seen evidence of this evil disregard for human life. They will tell you their lands are no longer safe, they do not feel free, and they're constantly on their guard for their own safety of themselves and of their property. Madam President, I understand that immigration enforcement is controversial, so much so that during his campaign, President Biden promised to avoid the issue entirely by halting construction of the border wall forever. But we're living in the real world now. And in the real world, the globe's most powerful and free republic is being taken advantage of by the West's most terrifying drug lords and human rights abusers. And the Biden administration is letting it happen. Congressional Democrats are letting it happen. Even though they don't want to admit it, it is happening. Look at the reports, look at the footage, talk to Customs and Border Patrol, and talk to the sheriffs in these counties. And so I say to my Democratic colleagues, do something. Do something. Work with us to find common ground and get this situation under control before it is too late. And realize that every town is a border town and every state is a border state until that border is secure. If you care about human rights, if you care about infrastructure, please care about this issue. Care about this issue. The environmental crisis, the humanitarian crisis, and the national security crisis. You can spend the next 4 years sitting on your hands and blaming President Trump or Leader McConnell or me or any of my Republican colleagues and blame us and say, well, there's death, there's destruction, there's drugs. And all of that is happening along this border. But that's the thing about winning elections. They do have consequences. And the consequence that is facing our Democratic colleagues right now is leading on this issue. You own this crisis. You own this crisis. It is from President Biden's failed immigration and border strategy. And if you fail to act, you will forever own the tragedy, the absolute tragedy that is unfolding along our southern border. I yield the floor.